You know, virtual reality sure has come a long way, with devices like the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift. But do you remember the VR craze of the early 90s? I know I sure do. Back then, Sega was working on a VR headset which sadly never came to fruition. And virtual reality even showed up in an Aerosmith video on MTV. In fact, for a short time, my local mall had a virtual reality arcade, which I was lucky enough to try once. The machines they had there were called Virtuality, and they were $5 a play, which was pretty damn expensive even by today's standards. I played two of the games they had there. One was called Zone Hunter, and the other was called Dactyl Nightmare, which you can actually get now on modern headsets if you want to go back and see what retro VR was like. This experience blew my little 10-year-old mind at the time, and I've been pretty obsessed with the idea of VR ever since then. This led me to go ahead and pick up Nintendo's Virtual Boy when that came out a couple of years later. Unfortunately, I sold that like an idiot, and I still don't have any of the new VR headsets yet. But all of this leads me to the subject of today's review, which is a cheesy old horror movie from 1993 called Arcade. I found this movie on the shelf at Blockbuster back when people used to go and rent VHS tapes from the store. I read the plot synopsis on the back, and being a kid who was obsessed with video games, naturally I asked my mom to rent it for me, which she did because she was cool like that. This movie was produced by Full Moon Entertainment, who is perhaps best known for the Puppet Master series. It was directed by Albert Pyun, who also directed Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. And unfortunately, it was written by David S. Goyer, who's mostly only written horrible dog shit throughout the majority of his career, such as The Crow 2: City of Angels, Batman v Superman, and Terminator Dark Fate. On the plus side, the music and sound design is by Alan Howarth, who collaborated with John Carpenter on a lot of his film scores, including one of my favorites, the score for Halloween 3. So the movie starts off pretty bleak, with our main character, Alex, having a nightmare about her mom committing suicide. And in the next scene, she's in therapy talking about it. Alex is our final girl for the movie, and she's played by Megan Ward. And if you're old like me, you might recognize her from Encino Man, Joe's Apartment, or PCU. The next scene takes us to the parking lot outside of Alex's high school, where we see a sweet Honda CRX. Not that that has any relevance to the movie whatsoever, but I just really like the Honda CRX. Anyways, this is where we get introduced to Alex's friends, aka our victims for the movie. There's Stilts, played by a young Seth Green, whom I'm sure you're all familiar with. Then there's Lori, played by A.J. Langer, who you might recognize from My So-Called Life, or you might remember her better as the smoking hot president's daughter in Escape from L.A. Next is Alex's boyfriend Greg, who's played by this discount Tom Cruise looking kid named Brian Dattilo, whom I've never heard of or seen in anything else in my entire life. And then there's Nick, the guy who has a secret crush on Alex, played by Peter Billingsley, whom I'm sure you all remember from A Christmas Story. You know, you'll shoot your eye out. And check this out, Greg and Alex take an early 90s selfie with a Polaroid camera. Then the dude ruins the picture by messing with the film. The kids start talking about the new Vertigo-tronics game, and Nick's really excited that it's interactive.
It's the new Vertigo-tronics game. It's interactive.
Now, Nick's supposed to be the pro gamer of the group, and I'm a little surprised that he doesn't realize that, by definition, all games are interactive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be games, Nick. Alright, so all the kids head to Dante's Inferno, which is their local arcade, to go and play this amazing new interactive virtual reality game. And there, Seth Green runs into Bulk from the Power Rangers, without Skull, and he informs us that Space Invaders is for retards.
Give me a break, man. They got fucking Space Invaders in here. That shit's for retards.
And since I played a lot of Space Invaders when I was a kid, I guess that makes me a retard. I can't disagree. Also, we established that pretty much everyone in the movie is gonna be a dick to Seth Green, seeing as how the owner of Dante's Inferno slaps him in the face. But who cares about that because Q just showed up to make this movie better. Oh wait, I mean John Lancie, But come on, he's Q, we all know it. He plays the slimy businessman who's doing marketing research for Arcade before its release, and he's here to get feedback on the game from all the kids. Q goes ahead and explains the basic rules of Arcade to Nick and makes special note of the escape button, which makes no sense. It's supposed to take you out of the game if things get too intense, but it's not like your head is strapped into the visor or anything, so I don't see why you can't just look away.
That don't make no sense.
But that's not really important, because what is important is that Arcade is actually Polygon Man's dad. So the first level of the game is called Corridors of Doom, and I can't help but think that's a subtle reference to something. This level proves to be too much for our pro gamer Nick, and he bails out before the Screamer can kill him. So Alex's boyfriend Greg is next up on the machine, while all the other kids follow Q out into the other room where he's given away home versions of Arcade for them to playtest. Of course, when Alex goes back to look for Greg, he's nowhere to be found because Arcade has taken his soul. And don't ask me what happens to his body because that part is never explained. So everyone just assumes that Greg slipped out unnoticed, and they all leave with their home versions of Arcade. Then Alex decides to give the game a try for herself at home, and that shit turns out to be too intense for her as well, and she hits the escape button on the first level, after which Arcade taunts her through the TV and does his best Freddy impression when he calls her a bitch.
Nick?
Hey, Alex. What's up?
I just called Greg. He hasn't come home yet.
Alex, he's your boyfriend. You keep track of him. You there?
He's right here, bitch.
She heads over to Nick's house and climbs in through the window, classic 90s move by the way, and tries to convince him that something is seriously wrong with Arcade. But of course Nick isn't convinced, and he tells Alex to go home and sleep on it. The next day when they go to school, half their friends don't even show up, and Nick starts to consider that maybe Alex was right. They go to their friend Lori's house to check on her, and they find that she's all fucked up and zoned out on Arcade. Then Arcade starts to taunt them through Lori's TV, and they see that Greg is trapped in there with him. He tells them that he wants them to play by his rules, which means they have to play Arcade. He also makes fun of Nick's little crush on Alex, but no one's really paying attention because Lori's freaking out.
You could leave Greg here, Nick, and have Alex all to yourself.
Change the channel.
Nick decides he's had enough of that shit, and he goes ahead and breaks Lori's TV with a lamp. I'm sure her parents won't be too pissed about that. So now they decide to go straight to Vertigotronics and try to get some answers about what the hell is going on with this damn game. Now the douchebag at the front desk tells them they need an appointment, but Nick uses a little slick talk to get Q to come out and see him. Q agrees to introduce them to the game's programmer, and this guy types with one finger, so you know he must be a pretty good programmer. This guy has all the tips and tricks for the game, like this one for example.
The keys. The keys are the key.
Yeah, see, they would have never known that the keys are the key if they hadn't talked to this guy. In fact, this guy knows so much about the game, he doesn't even need to bother with trying to beat it.
Nobody's been able to quite do it yet.
He tells them that if you pass the 4th level, you get a free life, meaning it's not missable. This will become relevant a little later in the review. Armed with this new information, they go ahead and break into Dante's Inferno to play Arcade. And I find it a bit odd that this business doesn't have an alarm, but the movie must go on. When they get there, greedy-ass Arcade won't even let them play until they give him a quarter, even though he wants them to play so he can take their souls. If they didn't have any quarters, then shit, I guess the movie's over. But luckily for us, they do have some. So now they're both gonna go in, which means it's a 2-player simultaneous mode. But I'm wondering, how the hell are they playing 2-player simultaneous when there's only one headset on the machine? I guess I shouldn't think too much about it because now Nick has an opportunity to confess his feelings for Alex.
I care about you, Alex.
It's tough being a hero, isn't it?
And of course he gets friend-zoned.
Friendship?
As they start up the game, Arcade takes a minute to go ahead and taunt them some more, and in response, Alex gives the most lackluster "fuck you" I've ever heard.
Fuck you.
So they load into the game, and Alex has written down all of the tips and tricks they learned on her arm. And it doesn't make a lick of sense to me how ink on your arm gets loaded into the virtual world, especially considering Arcade controls this world. But whatever, just go with it. So they make it to the second level together, and Alex picks up this hypnotic fractal that puts her in a trance. Nick then calls out to Alex to warn her not to look at the fractal so long, as he proceeds to look at the fractal and get himself killed. Except he doesn't really die because the programmer comes in just in time to save Nick by using the escape function. Then he conveniently explains why they can't use the same function to take Alex out of the game. Alex makes her way to the next level, where Stoltz and Laurie have been brainwashed to rip off the riddle from Labyrinth about the liar and the truth teller. Except here, they make the riddle really easy because they straight up tell you who's the liar and who's the truth teller. So she easily makes the right choice, and while she's on the boat making her way to the next level, the game says that a new player has entered and a kid falls into the water. And I'm wondering, who is this kid? Where did he come from? There was no other kid in Dante's Inferno when they started playing the game. Is this supposed to be some kind of online matchmaking or something? And then she rescues the kid out of the water, and she gets an extra life for doing it. So this was the extra life that the programmer was talking about earlier. So that means if she decided not to rescue the kid, she wouldn't have gotten the extra life, which is not what the programmer told them before. And I wonder, does the dude even know how his own game works? But I'd better stop wasting time nitpicking, because now it's time for the Tron ripoff scene. And now I should probably mention that the original special effects for this movie weren't considered to be good enough, so they had another team come in and redo them. Of course, this was in 1991, and the movie wasn't released until 1993. I guess they look okay for the year 1991, but by 93, they're a little rough. Alright, so they make it through to the next level, and this is where we get the big twist that I'm sure nobody saw coming, which is that the little kid is actually Arcade. So yeah, I didn't mention this before, but Arcade's CPU is actually made with brain tissue from this dead little kid who was abused by his mother. Oh, and he also does his Freddy Krueger impersonation again and calls Alex a bitch. Then Arcade turns RTX on, and the graphics get all good looking when he sends her into her nightmare about her mom committing suicide. And that's when Alex's mom kills her with a headshot.
Your mother's a bitch.
Hey, but don't worry, Alex had an extra life that somehow Arcade forgot about in his own game.
You forgot my free life.
Then she throws this heart thing right into Arcade's face, and somehow that defeats him. She beats the game, and now all of her friends' souls get released from the machine, so they're all back together again. And 3 of them happen to be wearing flannels, just in case you forgot which decade this was. Now Alex can go home and have a well-deserved rest. Happy ending. Or is it? Little Kid Arcade shows up to call Alex a bitch one more time.
I've made it. Gavin, where are you? Right here.
Bitch.
Leaving the possibility of a sequel, a classic horror movie trope. So that's Arcade. And to me, this movie kinda feels like a more grown-up version of Are You Afraid of the Dark? The whole thing about Alex's mom committing suicide is a little fucked up, as is the idea of using a dead little kid to make a virtual reality game. But I kinda like that. I get a little bit of a Nightmare on Elm Street feel from this movie, with Alex's nightmare and Arcade calling her a bitch all the time. Some aspects of the plot don't really make a lot of sense, but I've seen much worse plots from Full Moon movies, so it's not that bad. I would have liked a little bit of resolution with Nick's crush on Alex at the end of the movie, because it feels like that plot point never really went anywhere. I really like the music in this movie. It's so early 90s. I'll go ahead and play a little bit of it because, what's it matter? I'm never going to be monetized anyway, so who cares? Overall, I think Arcade's a pretty fun B-movie, especially if you're a fan of video games. And I kinda would've liked to see a sequel, although I'm sure it probably would've sucked. But that's all for this review. As usual, if you liked it, let me know down below in the comments or hit the like button. And if you want to see more content from me, don't forget to subscribe. And until next time, kiss reality goodbye, bitch.